What if your entire life was built on a lie, and the only person who could save you disappeared without a trace? Eva, a quiet orphan, is forced into a cold marriage with a billionaire haunted by his past. But when she uncovers a hidden journal, buried secrets begin to unravel. Secrets that tie her to a missing woman, a powerful trafficking ring, and a truth too dangerous to ignore. This isn't just a story. It's a fight for justice, love, and redemption. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe and hit this so you never miss a story that could change everything. The orphanage was quiet that night, as if the old walls themselves were holding their breath. Only the soft creaking floorboards echoed in the dim room where Eva Bennett stood, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The moonlight slipping through the cracked window spilled across her face, catching on the furrow in her brow and the tremble in her jaw. She hadn't cried. She wouldn't. Not in front of the others. But her hands, clenched into fists at her sides, told the truth. From the corner bunk, a small voice broke the silence. Eva. Eva turned. Claire, the youngest girl in the room, sat up clutching her ragged stuffed rabbit, her wide eyes blinking through the darkness. "I'll be fine," Eva said softly, forcing a smile as she crossed the room and tucked the blanket around Claire's thin shoulders. "You get some sleep, all right?" Claire nodded but didn't look convinced. Eva waited until the girl's eyes drifted shut before slipping quietly toward the door. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the knob. She wasn't sure where she was going. But she couldn't stay here. Not tonight. Downstairs, through the warped staircase and faded hallway, lights spilled from the office at the end. The door was cracked open just enough for Eva to see the silhouettes inside. Agnes Monroe, the orphanage director, sitting behind her desk with her usual rigid posture, and across from her, a tall man in a sharp, dark coat, his face partially turned away, Damian Kessler. Eva had only heard the name in whispers, spoken in fear and reverence by the older girls. Billionaire, ice cold, powerful enough to make things disappear. People, even, she'd never believed those rumors. Not really. But now, seeing him in person, she wasn't so sure. "I expect her to follow the terms," Damian said, his voice a low, gravel-edged command. "No complications." "She will," Agnes replied, her voice smoother than Eva had ever heard it. "She's obedient, desperate. She knows this is her only option." Eva's breath caught. Her? She backed away, her heart pounding, pulse loud in her ears. Her only option. No one had asked her. No one had even hinted. Just a few hours earlier, Agnes had called her into the office and laid it out like a job assignment, a contract marriage. 1 year, no love, no promises, just a place to live, a roof over her head, and in return, obedience. Damian Kessler would handle the rest. Eva had laughed at first, thought it was a test. But the look in Agnes's eyes was colder than she'd ever seen. Final. Now, standing outside that door, Eva felt more like a product than a person. Something sold off for convenience. But where could she go? The orphanage had made it clear her time was up. 18 and a half meant out. No degree, no money, no family. So maybe being his wife, even temporarily, was better than nothing. When the door swung open, Damian stepped into the hallway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharply cut features and storm-gray eyes that gave nothing away. He looked her over once, quick, clinical, and said, "This is her." Agnes nodded. "Eva Bennett. She's packed." Packed, like she wasn't even in the room. Eva wordlessly picked up her worn duffel bag. Damian gestured toward the sleek black car idling outside the gate, its windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. She followed him down the steps, every footfall echoing like a final drumbeat. She didn't look back. Not at the cracked paint of the orphanage, not at the flickering hallway light, not at Claire's tiny window upstairs. The inside of the limousine was quiet, the air sharp with cologne and leather. Damian sat across from her, staring out his own window, silent. Eva's fingers twisted the strap of her bag, knuckles white. Finally, he spoke. "Do you have any questions?" She jumped slightly. "What do you expect from me?" Damian turned to her, his eyes unreadable. Obedience. Discretion. No delusions. This is a transaction. Nothing more. Eva nodded slowly. She looked back at her reflection in the glass, but the girl staring back looked like a stranger. The limousine glided through the sleeping city like a ghost, its black frame catching glints of streetlight as it passed. Eva sat in silence, the low hum of the engine, the only sound between her and the man across from her. Damian hadn't spoken since his warning. His gaze was fixed out the window, posture perfectly still, as though even the motion of the car didn't touch him. Eva's fingers trembled slightly on her lap, still wrapped around the strap of her duffel bag. The city outside blurred past her, so familiar, yet now unreachable. She was leaving it behind, but for what? After nearly an hour, the car turned onto a long, winding road flanked by trees so tall and dense they swallowed the moonlight. Then, like a scene from a Gothic painting, the estate appeared, massive, solemn, and intimidating. The mansion was carved from dark stone, its towering silhouette framed by wrought iron gates that groaned as they opened. Cold outdoor lights illuminated the sharp angles of the roof and the ivy-clad walls, casting eerie shadows across the gravel driveway. The car slowed to a stop in front of the entrance, and Damian stepped out first. He didn't look back as he extended a hand. Eva hesitated only a second before accepting it, her fingers barely brushing his. His grip was firm and impersonal, just like everything else about him. "Welcome to your new life," he said, not a trace of warmth in his voice. Eva didn't answer. Her throat was too tight. Inside, the mansion was even grander. Marble floors stretched beneath her feet, polished to a mirrored sheen that reflected the glow from the massive crystal chandeliers overhead. Towering ceilings, oil paintings in gilded frames, and arched hallways created the feeling of stepping into a palace or a museum. Everything was elegant, perfect, and lifeless. Damian walked ahead without slowing, his footsteps echoing sharply in the vast, hollow space. Eva hurried to keep up, clutching her bag tightly against her chest. The quiet pressed in around her like the house itself was listening. "You'll be staying in the East Wing," Damian said, finally breaking the silence. "We'll go over expectations in the morning." Eva nodded mutely. Her mind felt untethered, still trying to grasp the surrealness of it all. This didn't feel like marriage. It didn't even feel like reality. He stopped in front of a set of double doors and pushed them open. The room inside was large and oddly warmer than the rest of the house. A fireplace sat unlit in the far corner. An armchair faced it, upholstered in soft gray fabric. There were books on the shelves, actual books, not decorative. A sleek black grand piano stood near the corner, its surface gleaming beneath the dim lighting. It was the first thing in the house that felt human. Eva's gaze lingered on it. She took a tentative step toward the instrument, her hand lifting slightly, almost instinctively. She hadn't played since she was a child, but something about this piano pulled at her. "Don't." The word cut through the air like a blade. Damian's voice, low and sharp, made her freeze. She turned to find him watching her, his expression hard. "It's not a decoration," he added, quieter now, but still stern. "Leave it alone." "I'm sorry." Eva murmured, retreating a step. His lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, he looked like he might say something else, but he didn't. Instead, he gestured to a door on the far side of the room. Your bedroom's through there. Everything you need should be inside. Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heel and left. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound louder than it should have been. Eva exhaled shakily, then sank into the nearest chair. Her bag slid to the floor with a soft thud. For a while, she just sat there, staring at the piano, its black and white keys glowing faintly in the low light. Her fingers twitched in her lap, aching to play. But Damian's warning echoed in her mind, sharp and final. She looked around the room again. It was beautiful, but not comforting. Everything was too perfect, too deliberate. No photographs, no keepsakes. Just space and silence. As exhaustion crept in, Eva leaned her head back and let her eyes close. Her world had shifted in a single night. She was no longer an orphan, but she wasn't no longer an orphan. But she wasn't sure what she was now. And something about this house, about Damian, whispered that answers wouldn't come easily. Morning crept into the room slowly, dragging pale light across the tall windows and the ornate crown molding above Eva's head. She stirred beneath the silky covers, the softness of the bed still foreign to her body. Everything here was too plush, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort. It unsettled. The kind that left you listening for something. Anything. Just to know you weren't completely alone. Slipping out of bed, she padded across the polished hardwood floor and pulled aside the heavy curtains. The view outside was like something from a painting. Manicured gardens stretching toward a distant hedge maze, trees that stood like ancient sentinels around the estate's edges. But even with all that beauty, something about it felt off, staged, like everything she saw had been designed to distract from something else. After changing into the clothes that had been neatly arranged in her closet, an odd touch, since she hadn't spoken to anyone about sizes or preferences, Eva made her way out into the hallway. The east wing was just as vast and ornate as the night before. Her footsteps echoed across the marble floor as she wandered past closed doors and windows too tall for her to see out of, without standing on tiptoe. She passed by a sitting room with sunlight pouring in and a vase of fresh flowers on the table. Too perfect, too precise. She wondered who arranged them, or if anyone even did. Maybe they just appeared, like everything else in this strange house. A soft rustle ahead made her pause. Rounding a corner, she saw a woman, mid-60s maybe, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, dusting the edges of a mirror with practiced ease. "Good morning," Eva offered, her voice a little uncertain. The woman looked up and gave a small, warm smile. "Good morning, dear. You must be Mrs. Kessler." Eva hesitated at the name. It still didn't feel real. "Just Eva, please." "Mrs. Reynolds," the woman said, nodding kindly. "I'm the housekeeper. Been with the Kesslers for 22 years. Eva's brows lifted slightly. "That long?" "Long enough to see this house go through its share of storms." Her voice softened as she turned back to the mirror. "It has a way of holding on to things. Memories, grief, secrets." Eva's spine straightened. "What kind of secrets?" Mrs. Reynolds didn't answer right away. Her hands slowed over the glass. "Not mine to share, dear. But you're not the first to wonder. Just tread carefully." The words lingered in the air long after Mrs. Reynolds disappeared down the hall. Eva continued wandering, her curiosity now fully awake. She found herself drawn to the main floor again, to the study she'd passed the night before, without a second glance. The door was slightly ajar, and this time she pushed it open. The room smelled of old paper and leather. Sunlight filtered through tall windows onto rows of bookshelves. each shelf filled with thick leather-bound volumes. The massive desk in the center was immaculately clean, except for a few scattered documents and a silver picture frame that caught her eye. Eva stepped closer. Inside the frame was a photo, slightly faded but unmistakably personal. Damian, younger by several years, stood with his arm around a girl. She looked about Eva's age, maybe a little younger. Her smile was bright and effortless, her long dark hair spilling over her shoulders. They looked happy, natural, real. Eva stared at the image, heart skipping. This girl didn't match anything she'd seen or heard of the cold, controlled Damian she knew. This girl had brought out something in him, something warm, something human. Put that down. The voice, sharp and low, startled her so badly she nearly dropped the frame. She turned to find Damian standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes locked onto the photo in her hands. "I'm sorry," Eva said quickly, setting the frame down. "I didn't mean to pry. I was just—" "Curiosity can be dangerous," he said, stepping fully into the room. "Especially here." There was a weight in his words that made Eva's stomach twist. But instead of retreating, she found herself asking, "Why do you keep it? If it hurts to see—" For a moment, Damian didn't answer. He stood still, his hand hovering over the desk. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "That's none of your concern." He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the vastness of the house, leaving Eva standing in the quiet with the photo and 1,000 new questions. The storm rolled in faster than the forecast had warned, sweeping across the estate like it had a personal vendetta. Rain lashed against the tall windows of the mansion, and thunder cracked so close it felt like the earth itself flinched. The lights flickered once, then again, and then went out, plunging the house into darkness. Eva stood in the center of the sitting room, the fireplace long cold behind her. She'd taken a book from the library earlier, hoping for distraction, but now it sat abandoned on the coffee table. The silence following the blackout was heavier than the storm outside. She could hear the wind breathing through the old stone walls, groaning in the timbers above. The mansion, so grand and composed during the day, now felt like something alive, watching, listening, waiting. She reached for her phone in her pocket, but there was no service. Of course. With only the lightning casting bursts of white light across the room, Eva made her way slowly to the far side, fingers trailing the edge of the furniture to steady herself. Then she saw it, the piano. Its polished black surface gleamed faintly in the storm's glow, the keys like teeth in a mouth that hadn't sung in years. She paused. Damian's warning echoed in her head. "It's not a decoration. Leave it alone." But the silence was unbearable. And the way the piano sat there, untouched, almost begging to be remembered. It pulled at her, stirred something deep inside. She stepped toward it, heart thudding louder with each quiet footstep. Her fingers hovered just above the keys. One soft touch. That's all she wanted. She pressed a single note. It rang out, clear and haunting, cutting through the silence like a whisper of memory. Her breath hitched. It didn't sound like any ordinary piano note. It felt like a voice calling from another time. Before she could second, guess herself, her hands moved. Slowly at first, then with more confidence, like muscle memory was guiding her. A melody formed, one she didn't recognize but somehow knew. It spilled from her fingers effortlessly, aching, intimate, sorrowful. A lullaby for ghosts. The room transformed as the music filled it, every note weaving into the storm, echoing off the stone walls and high ceiling. It was like the mansion itself was holding its breath. Footsteps. Eva froze mid-chord. A dark silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the occasional flash of lightning. Damian. His jaw was clenched, eyes fixed on her hands. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared as the last note faded into the charged air. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked, voice low and tight. Eva blinked.
I know. I wasn't thinking. It just came out.
His expression darkened as he stepped into the room, closer now. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not," she said, standing, her voice trembling. "I've never heard it before. It just..." Damian stared at her for a long, tense moment, and something in his face cracked. Barely, a flicker of pain, sharp and raw, like a wound torn open. "That song," he said quietly, "it died with Isla." The name landed heavy between them. Eva had heard it in passing. Whispers from staff, fragments in conversation. But this was the first time Damian had spoken it aloud, and the weight behind it was palpable. I don't understand," Eva whispered. Who was she? Damian's gaze snapped back to her, the vulnerability vanishing in an instant, replaced by steel. "Stay away from this piano," he said, his voice suddenly cold again. "And stay out of things you don't understand." Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the hall. Eva stood there, hands still tingling from the keys, heart pounding like a drum. The melody she'd played echoed faintly in her mind, like a memory she hadn't lived. Who was Isla? Why did the song seem to live in her fingers when she didn't know its name? She looked back at the piano, the silence now thicker than before. Whatever secrets this house held, whatever ghosts haunted its rooms, they were beginning to stir, and now so was she. The days that followed were cloaked in an odd quiet, not the kind that soothed, but the kind that buzzed just beneath the surface. Damian had returned to his usual cold, distant self, his eyes unreadable, his words clipped and professional. But Eva noticed the difference. Something had shifted after the piano. He didn't scold her again, didn't mention the song, but he avoided the room altogether. And when their paths crossed, he never looked her directly in the eye. Eva, on the other hand, couldn't let it go. The melody still played in her mind, sometimes in dreams, sometimes when she let her hands drift across the edge of the table or windowsill, as though the music was still in her fingers, waiting. But more than that, it was Isla. The name that hung unspoken in every hallway, behind every closed door. The girl in the photograph. The one who had loved that song. The one who is gone. The staff said nothing when Eva asked questions. Mrs. Reynolds, usually kind and warm, suddenly became vague and distracted whenever Isla's name came up. And the younger maid, Anna, quickly excused herself after offering a nervous glance down the hall. Whatever had happened to Isla Kessler, it was buried deep. But Eva could feel it, just beneath the surface, pulsing like a second heartbeat in the walls. She found herself wandering more, trying to map the strange rhythm of the house. There were rooms that didn't match the floor plan she'd been shown, doors that led to staircases ending in locked gates, wings that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. And one afternoon, while tracing the edge of the East Wing corridor, she found it. A hallway she hadn't noticed before, tucked behind a narrow alcove near the library. The air shifted the moment she stepped in, cooler, still, like the house was holding its breath again. The hallway was narrow and dim, the curtains drawn tight over the windows. Paintings lined the walls, landscapes at first, but then portraits. One, in particular, stopped her cold. It was Isla. The same soft eyes, the same smile, but painted in oils, her hair pulled back in a silver chain around her neck. Eva stepped closer, drawn to the way the artist had captured something behind her eyes. Knowing, something unfinished. just beyond the portrait was a door. At first, it looked ordinary, wooden, old-fashioned, with an ornate doorknob. But then, Eva saw the small brass plaque above it. The letters, though faded, were unmistakable. Isla. Her heart leapt into her throat. She reached for the doorknob, but it didn't budge. Locked. Of course. Still, the room's existence said enough. This wasn't just a guest room. It was Isla's. Kept closed, untouched, preserved like a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. Footsteps echoed behind her. Eva spun around, and her breath caught. Damian was at the far end of the hallway, eyes locked on hers. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was something sharper, something closer to panic. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, urgent. "I was just exploring," she said quickly, trying to sound casual. "I didn't know this part of the house was off limits." Damian closed the distance between them in a few strides. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone cut through the air like a blade. "This room is none of your concern. Stay out of it." Eva stared at him, refusing to step back. "Who was she, Damian?" His jaw tensed, eyes darkening. But instead of lashing out, he looked away. "You don't want to understand," he said, softer now, almost to himself. "Some things are better left buried." He turned without another word and walked past her, vanishing down the hall. Eva stood there for a long moment, her pulse racing, her gaze returning to the plaque. Whatever truth Damian was trying to bury, it lived behind that door. And Eva wasn't about to turn away from it, not now. The next morning, the house was as still as ever, but Eva no longer felt like a guest wandering through someone else's mansion. She felt like an investigator moving through the remains of something once living, now hollow. The hallway with Isla's room lingered in her thoughts like a splinter she couldn't shake. That door hadn't just been locked. That door hadn't just been locked. It had been sealed by grief, by guilt, and by the silent warning in Damian's eyes. Still, she couldn't walk away, not when the truth felt so close. She found herself in the smaller sitting room again, the one that had started it all, the piano still untouched in the corner. She didn't play this time. Instead, she sat in the armchair nearest the window, Isla's name echoing like a heartbeat in her head. The girl in the portrait. The melody that came from nowhere. The song Damian claimed had died with her. Eva needed answers, and she was done tiptoeing around them. That afternoon, she sought out the one person she knew wouldn't brush her off with polite silence. She tracked down Lucas Shaw, Damian's longtime advisor, in one of the back offices. He looked up from a thick folder of documents as she entered, adjusting his glasses with a hint of surprise. "Eva," he said, closing the file, "I wasn't expecting you." "I need to talk to you," she said without hesitation. "About Isla." Lucas's face shifted instantly. Not surprise, but caution. "Why are you asking about her?" he said carefully. "Because no one else will tell me anything. Because there's a locked room with her name on it. Because Damian's hiding something. And I think you know what it is." He sighed, sitting back in his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once and gestured to the seat across from him. Eva did. When she sat, Lucas steepled his fingers beneath his chin, studying her. She was the opposite of Damian, he said finally, his voice soft. Where he was guarded, she was open. Where he calculated, she felt. Isla had this. Light about her, like she couldn't see something wrong and let it be. Eva leaned forward. What happened to her? Lucas's eyes darkened. She disappeared. 10 years ago. The official story is that it was an accident. A hiking trip gone wrong. but anyone close to the family knows that's a lie. Eva's breath caught. Then what really happened? She was investigating something, Lucas said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. A network hidden beneath legitimate adoptions. Children being sold. Trafficked. Under the guise of family placement. She was close to exposing it. Too close. And then she was gone. Eva's mind reeled, the pieces beginning to fall into place. And no one looked for her? Damian did, Lucas said, his voice tight. He tore the world apart trying to find her, but there were too many powerful people involved. Too many doors slammed shut. But why would she do it alone? Lucas hesitated, then said, because she thought Damian wouldn't understand, or worse, would try to stop her. Eva felt her chest tighten. Isla had fought a war in silence, and the price had been everything. She saved someone, Eva said quietly, more to herself than to him. That song. That piano. I think she saved me. Lucas didn't look surprised. She talked about a girl once. Said she reminded her why she started digging in the first place. Eva's voice broke slightly. Then I have to finish what she started. Lucas met her gaze, the softness in his eyes replaced by something more serious. If you go down this path, there's no turning back. These people, whoever's behind this, they don't play fair, and they don't forgive. I don't want forgiveness, Eva said, her voice firm now. I want the truth. Lucas studied her for a moment, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a worn envelope. He slid it across the table. Start with this. It's the last file Isla gave me before she disappeared. Eva took it with trembling hands, her pulse racing. You remind me of her, Lucas said quietly. She stood, clutching the envelope to her chest. And for the first time since she arrived at the mansion, Eva didn't feel like a prisoner in someone else's story. She felt like the one who might finally rewrite it. Eva sat in the small sitting room that had slowly become her refuge, the envelope Lucas had given her still unopened in her lap. The late afternoon sun filtered weakly through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the patterned rug. Outside, the sky was turning a bruised gray again, the clouds thick with the promise of another storm. Inside, the air was charged with something heavier. Anticipation, dread, or maybe both. When she finally opened the envelope, her hands trembled. Inside was a small stack of documents, newspaper clippings, scribbled notes, and a single photograph. The photo was worn at the edges, clearly handled more times than it should have been. It showed Isla, standing beside a girl, much younger, maybe 7 or 8, her small hand clasped in Isla's. Both of them were looking straight at the camera. Isla's smile was gentle, protective. The little girl's face was partially turned, blurred by motion. But something about her felt familiar. Too familiar. Eva stared at it for a long moment before she realized why her chest had tightened. The girl was her. She didn't remember the photo being taken. Didn't remember Isla's touch, or the way her hand had been held so carefully. But her gut told her what her mind hadn't fully caught up to yet. That wasn't coincidence. Isla hadn't just been investigating some faceless trafficking ring. She'd saved Eva, pulled her out before it was too late. Lucas had known. Damian might have too. And now that knowledge throbbed like a second pulse beneath Eva's skin. She tucked the papers back into the envelope and stood abruptly. She had to talk to Damian. He couldn't keep running from the truth. Not when she was a living piece of it. She found him in the library, standing near one of the tall windows, a glass of something dark in his hand. He didn't turn when she entered, but he didn't have to. His shoulders were rigid, and she knew he'd sensed her before she even opened the door. I found the photo, Eva said quietly. Damian's grip on the glass tightened, but he still didn't face her. She saved me, didn't she? She continued.
I swear she was so close to.
Now he turned. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between anger and sorrow. She didn't tell me, he said. I found out later, after she was gone. Eva stepped closer, her voice shaking.
Why didn't you ever tell me?
What was I supposed to say? Damian snapped. That my sister risked everything to protect a child, and I couldn't even protect her? You still could, Eva said, her voice steady now. You still can. He stared at her, his jaw clenched, but the fight in his eyes was dimmed. For a moment, he looked like the man from the photograph, the one with softer features and someone worth protecting at his side. She believed in something, Eva said. In saving people. In fighting for them. If you loved her at all, Damian, help me finish what she started. The words settled between them like dust in the fading light. Damian moved slowly, placing the glass on the nearby table. His eyes, usually so distant, met hers with something raw behind them. I spent years pretending the door with her name on it was just a door, that the piano was just an object, that her ghost didn't live in every hallway of this house. But she never left, and now you're standing here, carrying her voice. Eva blinked away the heat in her eyes. Then, let's make sure people hear it. Damian gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. We'll need help. Someone who knows how to trace money, clean records. Someone who can find the others Isla was chasing. Lucas, she offered. No, Damian hesitated. He's good. But there's someone better. Someone Isla once trusted. Who? Her godmother, he said bitterly. Veronica Dane. Eva's heart sank. Veronica, the woman who came here last week. She's part of it. Worse, Damian said. She's the reason Isla had to fight alone. Eva stared at him, the pieces falling into place like dominoes. Then she nodded, her voice quiet but fierce. Then she's the one we bring down first. The next evening, the mansion's study was cloaked in silence, broken only by the soft rustle of papers and the faint ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Eva sat across from Damian, both of them surrounded by a growing pile of documents, ledgers, and digital printouts that Lucas had quietly handed over earlier that day. Each page felt like a breadcrumb on a winding trail. Numbers, dates, wire transfers, all meticulously hidden beneath layers of legal formality and charitable donations. But once you knew what to look for, the pattern was undeniable. Veronica Dane's name appeared over and over again. Donor, advisor, silent partner. But the most chilling were the payments made to the orphanage where Eva had grown up, sums far too large for a struggling group home. Damian's fingers traced a line of transactions, his brow furrowed with growing anger. Eva, seated beside him with Isla's journal open on her lap, paused on a specific entry. A sketch of a map with initials scribbled in the margins and one line circled in red. Last funnel point before shutdown. She read aloud, her voice soft but tense. That's her, Veronica Dane. Damian leaned over her shoulder. This date. It's a week before Isla disappeared. Eva looked up at him, her voice catching. She found something big. And she was getting too close, Damian finished, his jaw tightening. The room felt smaller now, pressed in by the weight of what they were uncovering. For years, Veronica had played the role of benefactor, of family friend. She'd comforted Damian after Isla's disappearance, helped maintain the Kessler reputation during the fallout, but behind that perfect poise, she'd been hiding rot. She used the orphanage to hide transfers, Eva said, sifting through more paperwork. Used it as a front to move money from adoption agencies into shell organizations. Then rerouted it through charity networks. She didn't just fund the operation, Damian muttered, eyes locked on the ledger. She built it. The revelation felt like a blow, but Eva didn't flinch. Her hands clenched into fists, her chest tightening with the realization that every lonely night, every whispered fear from the girls she grew up with, every name that vanished from the orphanage list overnight, it had all been part of this. I was part of it, she whispered, a hollow ache forming in her chest. They were going to sell me. But Isla stopped them, Damian said, more gently now. She got you out, gave her life trying to end this. Eva turned back to the journal. Then we finished what she started. They worked through the night, cataloging every shred of evidence, cross-referencing names, dates, and financial trails. Damian called in a quiet favor with a cybersecurity expert, encrypting what they'd gathered and making sure it couldn't be erased. Lucas returned just before dawn, pale and tense, his eyes dark with fatigue. "You found something?" he said the moment he entered the study. Damian slid the documents across the desk. More than something. Enough to bring Veronica down. Lucas skimmed the pages, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief to grim satisfaction. "This is solid. If we go public with this..." "She'll fight back," Eva cut in. "She has reach. Connections. She's already silencing people. We can't just drop this and hope it sticks." Lucas nodded slowly. "Then we need a stage. Somewhere she won't expect it." Damian leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed in thought. "She's hosting the Heritage Gala in 2 weeks. Every major donor, politician, and reporter in the state will be there." Eva blinked. "You want to confront her publicly?" Damian looked at her, and for once there was no coldness in his gaze. Only quiet determination. "She destroyed Isla in the dark," he said. "It's time we bring her into the light." The decision hung in the air like a promise. They wouldn't whisper behind closed doors. They wouldn't hide in shadows. If Veronica Dane wanted power, she'd have to answer for the cost. Eva reached across the table, her hand brushing Damian's. "We do it together," she said softly. Damian nodded, his grip closing gently around hers. "For Isla," he said. "For all of them," Eva replied. And in the flickering morning light, surrounded by the truth they had unearthed, the storm that had been building finally began to take form. Not just a reckoning, but a war they were ready to fight. The night of the Heritage Gala arrived faster than Eva anticipated. The Grayson estate was transformed into a world of glittering crystal, soft gold lighting, and music that hummed beneath the low murmur of the city's elite. Guests arrived in sleek black cars, stepping onto the red-carpeted entryway with polite smiles and practiced confidence. The room buzzed with laughter and shallow toasts, every conversation a performance. Every conversation a performance, every handshake a quiet transaction. Eva stood near the grand staircase, her hands smoothed nervously over the satin of her navy gown. The neckline dipped modestly, but she still felt exposed under the gaze of strangers. Her heart pounded, not from nerves about the crowd, but because tonight everything would change. Tonight, truth would no longer be a whisper buried beneath ledgers and locked doors. Across the room, Damian adjusted the cuffs of his black tuxedo, his posture perfectly composed. But Eva could read the tension in his eyes, the way his shoulders stiffened every time someone new approached him. He was used to these events, smiling, nodding, playing the game. But not tonight. Tonight, he wasn't here to network. He was here to tear something down. "You ready?" he asked softly when he reached her side. Eva nodded, though her throat was tight. as I'll ever be. The plan was simple on paper. At the peak of the evening, just before the charity auction began, Damian would take the stage and expose Veronica Dane with the evidence they'd gathered. Lucas was already in place with copies of the documents, prepared to send them to every major outlet the moment the announcement was made. There'd be no room for Veronica to talk her way out of it. But simple didn't mean safe. As they stepped into the ballroom, the crowd parted slightly, and there she was, Veronica. Dressed in emerald silk, her hair swept into a perfect twist, she moved through the room like a queen holding court. Her laugh rang clear, calculated. When her eyes landed on Eva and Damian, her smile widened, cool and composed. "Darling," she said as she approached, kissing the air near Damian's cheek. "And, Ava, what a vision you are." Eva forced a polite smile. "You look powerful." Veronica's eyes sparkled with veiled amusement. "I always do." Then she leaned in slightly, her voice low and honeyed. "But power, my dear, is only dangerous if you don't know how to use it." Before Eva could respond, the sound of a crystal bell chiming echoed through the room, signal for the guests to turn their attention toward the stage at the front. A hush fell, followed by a polite ripple of applause as Veronica stepped toward the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth, commanding, "thank you for joining us tonight in support of our shared mission, protecting the future for those who need us most." Eva's hands curled at her sides. "She's talking about the children," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The ones she sold." Damian stepped forward, his expression stone. "Not for much longer." Before Veronica could continue, Damian moved up the steps to the stage beside her. The crowd murmured, confused by the unscheduled interruption. Veronica turned toward him, her smile frozen. "Damian," she said through gritted teeth, "what are you doing?" He took the microphone. "Before we begin tonight's auction," he said, voice calm but steely, "there's something everyone in this room deserves to know." Silence fell. For years, one of our most trusted philanthropists has been hiding a network of corruption, using orphanages and adoption agencies to funnel children into illegal trafficking operations. Gasps. She played the part of a savior, but she was their executioner. He turned to face Veronica. "Veronica Dane." The room erupted in stunned chaos, some guests standing, others whispering, a few already pulling out their phones. Veronica's face had gone pale, her eyes narrowed with fury. "You can't prove any of this," she hissed, low enough for only Damian and Eva to hear. Eva stepped up beside him and held up a folder. "We already have." And just as she said it, Lucas triggered the press release. Phones buzzed around the room. Screens lit up with headlines. Veronica stood frozen for a beat, then turned and bolted from the stage. But two security guards moved in, blocking her path. Damian hadn't come unprepared. As the guests watched in horror and disbelief, Veronica Dane, the woman they had praised, funded, and followed, was escorted from the ballroom, her empire crumbling with every step. Eva felt Damian's hand find hers, steady and sure. They had done it. And there was no going back. The aftermath of the gala was a whirlwind of headlines, phone calls, and whispered conversations behind closed doors. By morning, news of Veronica Dane's arrest had saturated every major outlet. Her image, once the emblem of poise and generosity, now flickered across screens as the face of betrayal. The footage of Damian's speech, of Eva holding up the folder of damning evidence, had gone viral. Words like heroic, shocking, and justice filled the airwaves. But beneath all that noise was something heavier, something colder. The knowledge that this was only the beginning. Eva stood in Damian's study, watching the television with her arms folded tightly across her chest. The footage played again. Veronica being led away in handcuffs, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. It should have felt victorious, but Eva only felt the weight of what came next. "She'll fight this," Damian said, stepping into the room with a folder in hand. "Her lawyers are already claiming the evidence was fabricated, that we staged everything." Eva nodded slowly. "I expected as much." Damian placed the folder on the desk and sat beside her. His expression was calm, but the exhaustion around his eyes betrayed him. "The court of public opinion is leaning in our favor. For now, but the real battle will be in court, and behind it." "Behind it?" Eva turned to him, brow furrowed. "She wasn't working alone," he said. "The adoption ring had backers, investors, politicians, people with enough power to bury the truth if they get desperate." Eva looked back at the screen. "So we keep it in the light." "That's exactly what we do," Damian agreed. "But we have to be smart. They'll try to discredit us, twist everything." Just then, Lucas entered, his phone in one hand and a tight expression on his face. "They already are." He tossed a tabloid onto the desk. The headline read, "Kessler Heiress or Stolen Identity. New bride at center of scandal, may have faked her past." Eva picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the cruel, speculative article. Photos from the gala, blurry shots from her orphanage days, quotes from anonymous sources claiming she had manipulated her way into the Kessler family. Every paragraph was designed to erode her credibility. "This is how they'll do it," she murmured. "Make me the villain. Say I lied to get close to you, to take Veronica down for personal revenge." "They're afraid of you," Lucas said simply. "You're the proof, the living thread that connects everything. Without you, it's just paper and suspicion." Eva exhaled slowly. "Then I won't back down." Damian's hand found hers. "We won't." The next week was relentless. Reporters camped outside the gates. Supporters and critics alike flooded social media. Eva gave her first public interview, seated beside Damian and guided by a journalist who had once worked with Isla. She shared her story, not just of what had been done to her, but of who had saved her. She spoke Isla's name with reverence, and in doing so, she brought her sister's legacy back to life. Survivors began coming forward. One by one, women and men from across the country shared their experiences. Some rescued, others lost in the system, all finally feeling seen. Eva met with them, hugged them, listened to them cry. Damian opened the estate's unused guest wing to provide temporary housing for a few of them. Together, they started a foundation in Isla's name, focused on reform, legal aid, and survivor protection. Still, the pressure mounted. Court dates were set. Depositions prepared. Eva found herself in rooms full of lawyers facing questions designed to rattle her, to catch her in a misstep. But she didn't flinch. Each time she opened Isla's journal, she found strength, in her words, in her hope. One night, after a particularly grueling deposition, Eva returned to the sitting room with the piano. It was quiet again, like it had been waiting. She didn't hesitate this time. She sat, placed her fingers gently on the keys, and let the melody come. It flowed like it always had, haunting, steady, full of both grief and grace. Damian found her there, listening. "She'd be proud of you," he said softly. Eva looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope so." He crossed the room, knelt beside her, and took her hands. "She saved you, and now you're saving others." The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. And Eva realized this wasn't the end of Isla's story. It was only the beginning. The air in the Grayson mansion had shifted. It wasn't something Eva could see, not exactly, but she felt it in the way the halls no longer seemed to echo quite so hollowly, in the warmth that now lived in corners once cold and untouched. The silence that used to suffocate now felt restful, purposeful, a breath between the battles. It was like the house itself had exhaled, finally releasing what it had clutched so tightly for years. The foundation they had created in Isla's name was no longer just a symbol. It was movement. It was momentum. People were paying attention. Stories were being told. And more importantly, action was being taken. Damian had thrown himself fully into the work, surprising everyone, especially himself. He no longer hid behind the cold armor of his last name. He met with families, advocates, lawyers, politicians, and he did it not as a man chasing redemption, but as someone finally walking in step with his sister's legacy. Eva had never seen him like this. Focused, driven, and yet gentler. There were moments when he would glance her way in the middle of a long strategy meeting or a phone call, and she would catch the smallest hint of a smile, as if he still couldn't quite believe they were doing this, that they had made it out of the storm. One morning, she found him in the East Wing, Isla's hallway. He stood before the locked door, the plaque bearing her name still tarnished with time. In his hands was a small key. Eva approached slowly, watching him as he stared at the door. "You don't have to," she said softly. He turned to her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I think it's time." Together, they stepped inside. The room was exactly as Isla had left it. Light filtered through the curtains, brushing across shelves filled with books and framed photos. A desk with old papers still stacked neatly on top. A half-finished painting resting on an easel near the window. Everything was preserved. Frozen in a moment, just before her disappearance, untouched by the chaos that had followed. Eva crossed the room slowly, letting her fingers trail along the edge of Isla's writing desk. There was a journal there, not the one Eva had found in the piano, but another, filled with notes about plans, outreach, names of potential allies. It was clear Isla had never stopped working, not even in the sanctuary of her room. She lived here, Eva whispered. She dreamed here. She fought from here. Damian nodded, swallowing hard, and I never even noticed how much she was carrying. Eva turned to him. "You see it now. That's what matters." He exhaled and looked around the room. "I think I want to reopen it. Not as a memorial, but as a space. A center, maybe. For survivors. For people like Isla. Like you." Eva felt her chest tighten with emotion. She would have loved that. They spent the rest of the day sorting through Isla's things, cataloging what could be used, what needed to be preserved. Damian barely spoke, but Eva understood. Grief had no schedule. It came in waves, and today he was standing in the tide. That evening, they returned to the study, papers in hand, plans unfolding. Lucas joined them, his face lit with something close to pride, as he skimmed the new proposal. "It's bold," he said, "but it's right." Eva smiled faintly. That's how Isla would have done it. Later, as the house settled into its late-night stillness, Eva found herself once again at the piano. She played softly, the melody no longer haunting, but grounding. Each note carried the weight of what had been lost, and the hope of what had been lost, and the hope of what had been found. Damian leaned against the doorway, watching her. "You've changed everything," he said. She looked up, her fingers pausing. "So have you." He walked toward her, slowly, almost cautiously, and sat beside her on the bench. For a long moment, they didn't speak. The air between them was calm, unhurried. Then, quietly, Damian reached for her hand. Eva turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you're finally letting someone in. He nodded once, then leaned in, pressing his forehead gently to hers. Together, they sat at the piano, the melody between them like a promise, one of healing, one of beginning again. The community center was smaller than Eva had expected. Modest brick walls, a creaky wooden floor, and plastic folding chairs lined up in uneven rows. But as she stood behind the podium, fingers lightly gripping its edges, she felt the weight of every soul in that room. Survivors, advocates, foster parents, local officials. They hadn't come for glamour or applause. They had come for truth. For hope. Damian sat in the front row, his expression calm, steady, but his eyes never left her. His presence grounded her, just as it always had. Eva glanced down at the folded page in her hand, one torn carefully from Isla's journal. Her voice was soft at first, but clear. I met a girl today. She reminded me why I started this fight in the first place. Her eyes were filled with fear, but she didn't cry, not even once. If I can do one thing right in this life, it will be ensuring she finds safety. I won't let them take her future like they've taken so many others. She looked up, her gaze sweeping across the silent room. A murmur stirred in the audience. Eva took a breath and continued, her voice gaining strength. I didn't know it then. I didn't remember her face, but she remembered mine. Isla Kessler gave everything to protect people like me, children who were treated like property, like currency. She tried to expose a system that preyed on the vulnerable. And when no one listened, she kept fighting, even when it cost her everything. She paused, letting the silence settle again. But now people are listening, because of her. Because of what we uncovered. And because too many of us are done being silent. Applause didn't erupt. It wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, they were quiet nods, shining eyes, a heaviness shared by everyone present. After her speech, people came up to speak with her one by one, some quietly thanking her, others sharing their stories. Survivors who had never spoken aloud about what they endured now found themselves whispering the truth for the first time. Damian stood by her side the whole time. When the last guest filtered out, he placed a gentle hand on her back. You didn't just speak for Isla, he said softly. You gave every one of them a voice. Eva looked at him. We did it together. That night, they returned to the mansion, both of them too full of emotion for sleep. They wandered through the East Wing again, through Isla's now open room. There were fresh flowers on her windowsill, and a small engraved plaque on the door, the Isla Kessler Foundation for Justice and Recovery. Eva stepped into the center of the room, spinning slowly as she took in the shelves of books, the softened lighting, the framed photos now on the walls, smiling faces of children and families who had found safety through the Foundation's work. It no longer felt frozen in time. It felt alive. I want to add something, Damian said suddenly. Eva turned.
What?
He reached into his jacket and pulled out a velvet box. Her breath caught. I know this wasn't how our story started, he began, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. It started with obligation, with silence, with two people who didn't choose each other. He opened the box. A simple ring rested inside, a single sapphire set in gold. But every day since that first night you've taught me something new, about courage, about truth, about love. And I don't want to pretend anymore. Eva's eyes shimmered. Damian. I'm not asking you to forget how we got here, he said. I'm asking if you'll stay, because you want to. Because you choose to. She stepped closer, tears slipping down her cheeks as she smiled. already did. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that moment, it wasn't about the past or the pain. It was about the promise. The one they would build not from wealth or legacy, but from truth. Outside, the wind stirred gently through the trees. Inside, the house glowed. No longer haunted, no longer a prison, but a home. The echoes of Isla's song lived in the walls, not as grief, but as grace. Eva rested her head on Damian's shoulder, his arm around her as they stood in the heart of the room that had started it all. "We'll make sure her light never fades," she whispered. Damian kissed the top of her head. "Not while we're breathing." And as they stood there in the quiet glow of the foundation Isla had dreamed of, the mansion no longer loomed. It stood tall, rebuilt on love, truth, and the strength of those who refused to be silenced. Life lesson from the story. This story reminds us that the past doesn't define who we are. It shapes who we become. Eva's journey from silence to strength, from victim to voice, teaches us that healing begins with truth, even when the truth is buried deep, even when powerful forces try to silence it. There is always a way forward, if we are brave enough to face it. Damian's transformation proves that redemption is possible, not through denial or wealth, but through accountability, vulnerability, and choosing to stand for something greater than ourselves. Isla's legacy was never about fame or recognition. It was about doing what was right, even in the shadows, even when it cost her everything. Her courage lit the path for others to follow. And in the end, it was love, not power, that changed the course of so many lives. This story is for anyone who's ever been silenced, doubted, or dismissed. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And there is power in standing up, not just for yourself, but for others who can't. Let's keep that light burning. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? We love hearing from our incredible community around the world. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story filled with heart, healing, and hope. Thank you for being here. You matter.